On today's show, many Padres players were super disappointing in 2023, obviously. But one guy, one big star, most obviously did not disappoint. That is Juan Soto, continuing the player review series for one of the best bats in, dare I say, all of baseball. Juan Soto's season, the good, bad, occasionally ugly. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to an edition of Locked On Padres podcast, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for Tuesday, October 17th. As always, I'm your host with sometimes, occasionally, but certainly not always the most, Javier Reyes. You can follow me on Twitter at Javipeno, Javiipeno, or at LO_Padres, or Locked On Padres on the old YouTube, where you can see Tatis, you can see Pac-Man, and believe me, Michael Wacha, we'll get into Mr. Wacha later with player reviews. And you can see whatever I'm wearing, if that floats your boat. I'm wearing red. Because today, we're going to be talking about a player who was red hot for most of this year. That is, of course, Juan Soto. The big, high, like the A.J. Preller's magnum opus when it comes to, I'm not even saying like whether it was good or bad, just in terms of blockbuster trades, this was easily his most incredible move. In a lot of ways, just super up there. And I think that's where it starts when you talk about the story of Juan Soto. I think you have to talk a little bit about last year. And last year, Juan Soto, joined the Padres. It was a crazy trade when it happened. There was rumblings and reports that it was between them and the Cardinals and the Dodgers. The Dodgers, I think, frankly, are just really smart. And their thing is, we already had our stars. We don't necessarily need to blow up our farm. We really trust our farm system. And the Cardinals, I think, are pretty dumb. At least have been very dumb lately. Lately, though. Not historically, no. They've been excellent, obviously, as their championships attest to. But they decide not to give up like a Dylan Carlson, reportedly, in order to get Juan Soto. Instead, he ends up with the Padres. They give up Robert Hassel, C.J. Abrams, James Wood, Mackenzie Gore, Roberto Sazuna, like all sorts of players, basically their whole farm. And he joins the Padres. And one thing that I think gets slightly forgotten these days, maybe not as much from Padres fans, but he wasn't very good when he was on the Padres. Or at least he wasn't as good, I should say. That's a better way of describing it. With the Padres in the second half, by the way, of last year. And in general, it just wasn't one of Juan Soto's best seasons, I think is what you saw, right? And he joins the Padres last year, and of course, really rough for the end of the season. He has an on-base percentage that's below 400, which, for the record, is not bad. It's just that we weren't used to that, right? He slashed .236 with a .388 on base and a .390 slugging, which was the biggest thing. This is a guy that slugs a lot better than that. But in general, he also had been a little bit of a slump with the Nationals too, .246, .408, but .485 slugging when he was with the Nationals last year. So a lot of people saw like, what the heck happened here? Like, why isn't he, hitting as well? And it was really annoying because it was just yet again another example of whoever the Padres bring in, you either stay the same or you get worse. But he was really helpful in the playoffs. He had some big hits for the team. Obviously, one of the go-ahead, I think it was the tying hit that ends up, the famous inning when they scored like 7 or whatever it was and came back and ended up winning the series. The Cronenworth losing his mind. The Kim, fist to the air, that whole thing. Soto was very good for them in the playoffs. And in general, the vibes were immaculate. Bringing Juan Soto, I'll still never forget his first game. In Petco, just the atmosphere was outstanding. It's the type of thing that you really do not see in Major League Baseball, including for teams that also make moves that are at least maybe not on the level of Juan Soto. I think the Juan Soto trade is one of the biggest blockbusters of my personal sports watching lifetime, or at least maybe one of the biggest since, say, Miguel Cabrera from the Marlins. That's just one example. But for the most part, this is the biggest one. Maybe Francisco Lindor is a tiny bit up there too. But for Juan Soto, just him, and then obviously you have Brandon Drury and Josh Bell in the lineup last year too. It was just electric, the atmosphere. And don't get me wrong, his season was a little bit disappointing last year, and it caused some reason for concern. And then in the offseason, you might wonder, especially looking back now. Maybe is that partially why they didn't prioritize maybe extending him in the last offseason, so back before 2023 even started. Maybe because he hadn't quite done it with the Padres yet. And with the Padres, his ground ball rate went up, his slugging went up, he wasn't hitting well. In fact, last year, really weird outlier, he just couldn't hit against lefties nearly as well. 106 WRC plus against lefties last year. He, of course, remedied that this year. And we're going to get more into the numbers in just a second when it comes to Soto. And then in 2023, Soto basically delivered. Soto was one of the FanDuel favorites, actually, sponsor of this podcast. One of the FanDuel favorites, if I'm not mistaken, the favorite, actually, heading into the season for MVP odds. And I'm actually curious. I'm going to look that up right now, like what were the other players that were favored. But Juan Soto delivered in a lot of ways. And I think that while there's a lot of questions to be had about him, yeah, it was Soto, Betts, Goldschmidt, Acuna, Tatis, Arenado, Machado, Trey Turner, Freddie Freeman, Pete Alonso in terms of the top 10 heading into the season. So Soto did deliver. All those guys, frankly, delivered with few exception, which is cool. I that's actually kind of sick that, like, you know, there wasn't a lot of superstars that fell off out of nowhere this year, especially considering the superstars in the league are very young. But Soto this season, I think he almost gets a little bit overlooked. I think he might have even gotten a little bit taken for granted. From yours truly, by the way. I don't think that I praised Soto enough this year. I think that partially why I did it is because it was expected. This is one of the, I mean, everyone makes the Ted Williams comparison a lot. That's basically what he is. And he certainly improved this year over what he had done in the half season with the Padres. It didn't look like that immediately, though. And that's what we got to talk about, guys. Like, it didn't look like it immediately. And that's what kind of freaked out some people is he started off really poor. Remember, we had like questions early on in the year about his lineup spot. He reportedly wanted to be, what was it, third in the lineup, and they kept putting him 2 or something along that line. It was like a really weird thing. And another thing that happened is apparently he did struggle with the pitch clock changes. I think he was on record. He did mention that. Some other analysts brought up the same thing, that, you know, for a player as meticulous as him, with a player as good of an eye, as he once said, you know, when asked why, if he thinks he's been, you know, hurting the team a little bit by not getting hits instead of walks, and he's like, why would I swing at pitches that are balls? Basically, like, and who are we to argue with Juan Soto's plate discipline and eye at the plate, right? So that was just a very funny moment. One of the most underrated quotes to come from any Padre and any player this year, in my opinion. Go look that up. That was hilarious. But he joins the team, and there's sky-high expectations. And while he didn't deliver on MVP promise, and frankly, I don't know if he will, only because there is a giant defect to his game that we're going to talk about. But even still, he was excellent this year, and we got to break it down because this is one of the few players that really did perform and live up to expectations in basically every facet of what you could have expected from a superstar, and especially a superstar that you gave up so much for, even if I do have questions about the contract. And we're going to get into the contract at the end of the show as well. But before we get into the stats and how Soto's season went, guys, let me just take a quick second to tell you about something real nice. Real nice. It's been a while since I mentioned them, too. It's been a while. It's been a little old time since I mentioned them. But I want to talk to you guys about the good folks over at Bird Dogs, ladies and gentlemen. Here's the thing. Do you like being comfortable? Good. That's what Bird Dogs do. They make you look good and feel comfortable. Bird Dogs stretch khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look, you know, like you're an Olympian. You know, like when you go to those art museums and you see the statues and all that stuff. That's what you're going to feel like when you wear these bad boys. And I would know. Last time I was out at the Yankee Stadium, which was months ago, granted, but even better example because it was really hot out. And guess what? They help you with that. You're not going to feel like you're sweating through these things or anything like that. They're really comfortable, super fresh, and they're kind of the exact same thing as Lululemon, but they just fit way better. And it's awesome. Bird Dogs fix the issue of stiff, restricting cotton by inventing cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki but stretches so you get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement. So basically the more mechanical way of explaining what I was just saying. It's just really great. And like I said, anti-stink, sweat wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. They're fantastic, seriously. And also work for every occasion. This isn't like this isn't the right scene for this. Don't worry. Every occasion, these bad boys got you covered. And if the occasion doesn't fit them, then it's on the occasion's fault and not bird dogs, ladies and gentlemen. Let me tell you, you got to get some new friends or a new environment to party, whatever you're doing. So go check out Bird Dogs, guys. Go to birddogs.com/lockedon or enter promo code LOCKEDON at checkout for a free Bird Dogs water bottle. Oh, I'm sorry. Enter code LOCKEDONMLB. Very key important. My apologies, ladies and gentlemen. I just got so excited thinking about the Bird Dogs. Enter promo code LOCKEDONMLB at checkout for a free Bird Dogs water bottle with your order. And, you know, as someone who recently lost a water bottle, I'm about to go do that myself because I miss having a water bottle. I lost it somewhere. That's right. Just for listening to this podcast, guys, you can get that extra bonus. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off. We promise you. So one more time, birddogs.com/LockedOnMLB, promo code LockedOnMLB. Go check it out. And we are back here, ladies and gentlemen, on the Locked On Padres podcast. Thank you for making us your first listen, hopefully, every day. And also, be sure to check out SiriusXM and all that good stuff. Love the homies over there. Let's get into the specifics, the stats of Juan Soto's season this year. And it was a very good season. First of all, in comparison to his line last year, in total, his line last year, I should say, with the Washington Nationals and San Diego Padres, like I said, he slashed .242 with a 401 on base and a .452 slugging. And a lot of that was better when he was with the Nationals, like I mentioned earlier, and with a 145 WRC plus, a 3.9 F4 in total. So very low by Soto standards. If you're curious, the year before when he almost won the MVP, and I remember valiantly just campaigning against that, because my thing was I just thought that his season didn't matter. And I think that sometimes we should, if it's a very, very close race, I think a tiebreaker should be, were you involved in moments? And it's not the fault of Soto, but that's just the reality. He had a 7.1 F4 in 2020. In just 60 games, he had a 2.6 F4. Year before that, 5.7. Year before that, 3.7. The guy's been automatic as a batter. Lifetime career WRC plus of 154. And this year, he improved, ladies and gentlemen, just as we all needed and just as the good folks over at FanDuel thought. 155 WRC plus with his slash line of 275, 410, 519 slugging, which is his best slugging percentage that he's had since 2021, which was very good. In fact, I think it was, hold on, was it better? Yeah. So he wasn't as good last year. That's not saying much. So basically last year was the outlier. Wasn't his best overall slugging percentage of his career. His best was in 2020, if you count that, or of course in 2021 with the 5. I mean, my God, he had a 548 slugging in 2019. Do you ever like look at the Soto numbers and you're like, my God, how do we have this guy? But anyway, 275, 410, 519 slash line, like I said, was a lot better this year, and a 5.45 F4 to go with it. That was the 12th best mark among all active players in baseball. Some players, if you're curious about who was above him, Bobby Witt Jr., yeah, he had a really, really good season this year, and especially I think he helped out with his defense. Julio Rodriguez, Corbin Carroll, Francisco Lindor, Corey Seager, Marcus Semien, Shohei Ohtani, Matt Olson, Freddie Freeman, Mookie Betts, Ronald Acuna Jr., okay? Really great company. And he was great this year. And also, one of the things that has plagued the Padres in this entire player review series is that every Padres player was pretty bad when it came to delivering in the clutch. That was not the case with Juan Soto, though, and that is something that he should be rightfully praised for. In terms of runners in scoring position this year, he hit 299, which was by far like the best mark, basically, of anyone on the team. If you want to go by advanced stats, runners in scoring position, his WRC plus was a 165, which was actually better than his bases empty mark of 149, and just general men on base of 163. So he did show up in that regard. Now, if you want to go to the high leverage situations, which Fangraphs, that's what they chart over there. If you want to go by that, in low leverage situations this year, Juan Soto had a 158 WRC plus, which is obviously excellent. In medium leverage, he had a 157, and in high leverage, a 125. So that does show you that even Soto at least had a little bit of a step back when it came to being clutch this year, at least in some scenarios. Now, don't get me wrong, he was still excellent. 125 is very good, and that's still something that like counts as having a great year, especially since you're so good at getting on base in the first place. That's a good thing when it comes to talking about Soto's clutch ability, is just even if he wasn't always driving in the highest leverage, he still had that 125 WRC plus, 25% better than your average batter. Even if you have that, still, You know what I mean? Like, even still, the fact that he was able to basically always at least get on base, it's not his fault that other Padres weren't able to deliver at all, with guys like Machado and Bogarts being the main culprits. And then, believe me, I cannot wait to do the player review on Trent Grisham, because holy daddy-o was that guy bad in high leverage this year. But you might be wondering, well, what were situations that he did struggle this year? Basically only one for the most part, and that's strangely with runners on first and third this year. Was kind of the only situation in which he was bad, where he hit 130 this year with a 192 on base percentage and a 435 slugging, which is hilarious. So, and that was, by the way, in 26 plate appearances when he had runners on first and third. So that's probably where the low leverage, where his numbers declined in high leverage, specifically with runners on first and third. I'm not sure why. I imagine that it was just like a weird, like fluky thing in a lot of ways. It's not like he grounded into a ton of double plays either. He grounded into 2 with runners on first and third this season, so it's not like that was some crazy thing. In general, he wasn't that bad with double plays this year, frankly. But even still, it's just weird stuff that happens sometimes. He was bad specifically with runners on first and third. If it was runner on first, it was runner on second, it was runner on second and third, or if it was run on just third, he was great, right? But like, I don't know, and bases loaded, he was great. But for some reason, first and third was bad for him. And I think that's where some of the Padres fans, like a little bit, and this might have been just a Twitter echo chamber thing, but there was some pushback on Soto at points this year. And I think this is what it was, is that people happen to be tuning in with this specific base configuration, and he did disappoint there. But even still, the in general high leverage numbers show you that just because he got a little bit worse, he was still very good. I only care if you get significantly worse with runners on base. So you know what I mean? Like if you are Tatis and Machado, like Tatis I think was like a 96 WRC plus in high leverage or something like that. Bogarts obviously and Machado, like those guys became below average players. Soto was still an above average player, so I'm not hating on him for that. And also, this season was really good when it came to his power. 35 home runs this year, setting a career high for a single season, in his single season, I should say. 35 bombs, 109 RBIs. He was a big run producer. He was great. OPS of 930. There's basically no statistical number that'll freak you out. If you want to go on Baseball Savant, guess what? All of his numbers were there. And that's why I think that Baseball Savant can be really important, and why hard hit advanced analytics that you can just quickly check up, like the basic ones, if you're just new to baseball, those are really helpful to determine if someone's slow start is a little bit unlucky or not. And what we saw based on his numbers is Soto had like a really slow start this year, but the advanced numbers show you that he was getting a little bit unlucky. He had a 238 BABIP in March and April, and that is why it resulted in a pretty poor slash line of 202, 373, 384, but that's still a 757 OPS. What I loved, and 114 WRC plus, what I loved about Soto's like first month was, yes, I think that the concern wasn't entirely unwarranted, because you had the second half of last season, so you were wondering, is this going to not translate or whatever? But of course, way too talented, he ends up figuring it out, and that could have been part of the pitch clock thing. That could have been part with his new lineup order, or just teammates that he's batting in front or back of. That's fine. And eventually he turned it around. But even still, you saw that he had the plate discipline that first month, and he still had all the hard hit data. And as you look at this year, still one of the best players in baseball. If you want to look at batting run value, he's the 97th percentile. Weighted on base, 97. Expected batting average, 98. Hard hit rate, most importantly, 99th percentile this season. And that was the same case basically last year as well. And in fact, I'm sorry, not last year, the years before, basically up there. In fact, it was his hardest hit. This was his best hard hit percentage of his career, 55.3%. Last year it was 47.4, which, by the way, is still very good. You know what I mean? Like, that just shows you like how freaking absolutely maniacal this man is at the plate. Like 47.4 was like the lowest that he'd had in a long time. The one thing that did change for Soto in terms of his like overall offensive output, his strikeout rate. Very weird this year. It did spike a little bit. Now, granted, maybe it's possible that these past 3 years, he'd just been super, super overperforming in a lot of ways. But that like classic walk to strikeout ratio, he basically was amongst one of the best in the league, especially if you look at like outside zone swing percentages. It's like him, strangely enough, like Robbie Grossman, Luis Ariz. but Soto's up there in terms of just being a really patient hitter. But it was interesting this year that last 3 seasons, his strikeout rate was around 14%, 14.3, 14.2, and 14.5. This year it was 18.2%. And also his walkout rate. His walk rate went down a little bit too, from 20.3% last year and 22.2% the year before to 18.6%. Now, again, these are just nitpicks. This is the definition of nitpick. If you put it in the dictionary, if you look up on Wikipedia what nitpick means, you will see a picture of me or a link to this podcast saying this stuff about Soto. He's still excellent. The fact that he can walk more than he strikes out, and he's done it consistently. This isn't like a Victor Martinez, just a little bit of a throwback. Excellent player, but he only did that like 1 year, right? Like that doesn't happen very often. The fact that he does it consistently at such a young age of 24 years old is absolutely obscenely ridiculous and broken, and doesn't make any sense, and is comical and stupid that he's that good at the plate. But that's at the plate, ladies and gentlemen. That's at the plate. And that's what we have to talk about now, because this relates to Juan Soto's contract and it relates to his future with the Padres. Of course, I'm talking about his defense. His defense, ladies and gentlemen. But before we get into that, I mentioned them a couple times on the podcast already in terms of the odds favorites for the MVP. Well, guess what? We're talking about them again. It's FanDuel, everybody. And October baseball is obviously here. It is back. And let me tell you, you can make your postseason debut, go for eternal glory with America's #1 sportsbook at FanDuel. If you join today, you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to create your new account. Then you can get on the action from the first pitch until the final out. You can bet on total bases. You can bet on strikeouts, home runs. If we had FanDuel as a sponsor yesterday, I would have told y'all, Bryce Harper's birthday yesterday, I would have said, hey, do anything with him, whether it was home runs or bases. I would have done something for Bryce Harper yesterday. What happened? He hit a home run, and that place went bananas. Let me tell you, by the way. Go look that up. But anyway, that was an aside. You can do it all the rest of the playoffs, all sorts of players. You want to make some pitching bets. You want to make fun of Aaron Nola. Go ahead. Like, he's pitching, I believe, tonight. You can get on the action there. And if you don't want to wait the whole game to get a W, predict what will happen in the next at bat with quick bets. That's right, guys. They got you covered on everything. So head on over to FanDuel.com/lockedon right now. Step up to the plate with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed after you place your first $5 bet. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. And we are back here, ladies and gentlemen, on the Locked On Padres podcast. Go check out our homies over at SiriusXM, and thank you for making us your first listen every day. We are in the waning moments of Juan Soto's 2023 season. And one thing that's interesting, and we're going to get to this at the end, is moments for his season. I have some words on that, but last thing we got to talk about is the most obvious, and that is Juan Soto's defense. I've mentioned many times on this podcast that he looks like a tree. He's really bad defensively, if you go by the usual stats that people use to kind of look at defense, or I should say the usual advanced stats that people use to look at defense. So not your fielding percentage or errors, you know what I mean? Although I promise you he had plenty of those. In terms of fielding this year, in the outfield, he had a -6 outs above average mark. A -6 defensive runs saved mark and a -9 outs above average mark. It was the outs above average slightly better than last year. He had a -13 in total last year in outs above average and was somehow nominated for a Gold Glove, and -2 defensive runs saved. If you look at the totality of Soto's career, even if you want to use like ultimate zone rating, he's been a negative defender basically the whole time, with the exception of 2021. And I think that's why 2021 you saw that 7 F4, right? And I'm not saying, by the way, that I've personally started to have a feeling of how much does defense matter? It certainly matters, especially if you want to be like the overall best player. But in terms of like being a winning player and whatnot, sometimes if your offense is great, I kind of don't care. And one of the reasons that's been making me think that is because the Phillies, like, they're just going to be like maybe in the World Series again, despite having basically a negative defender at nearly every position, with the exception of catcher and maybe shortstop with Trey Turner. Like, I just think that that's fascinating. You know what I mean? Like I have some questions about defense, but in general, just looking at Soto as a defender, really bad this year. The only thing that he has going for him is that he does have a strong arm. He does have a little bit of the Yoenis Cespedes vibes where you're almost wondering if he makes these mistakes so he has the chance to throw them out. I don't think he's doing that at all. But, Soto is really poor. He doesn't track the ball very well. Like I said, his range is fairly just atrocious. Like, absolutely atrocious. If you look at left field this year, if you just want to look at left field and not just total outfield stuff, -6 defensive runs saved and -9 about outs above average. And I don't think that outlier season, I think that's what it was. I think it was an outlier. I think Soto isn't a very good defender. And I don't think he necessarily has the tools for it. He doesn't track the ball well. He's not particularly fast. He was also a pretty poor base runner this year. -4.3 base runner rating by Fangraphs. Wasn't good. He had multiple times this year. My buddy Aram Layton over at Just Baseball commented he's lucky he rakes. You know what I mean? When he got caught at third, I think at one point this season, trying to stretch a hit that he shouldn't have. A lot of bad base running. Doesn't steal bit for bases. He actually does. I didn't even realize that. He stole 12 bases this year, but nonetheless, he's not known for that. That's it's the biggest fault of Soto's game is he's not a complete player. He's not a great defender, and he's not a good base runner. And those are two things that usually should absolutely matter. Big time. And they do, but because he rakes so much, people kind of don't care. You know what I mean? People kind of don't care. Now, it is something to throw out there, but considering the Padres have so many good defenders anyway, I feel like that part wasn't felt as much. You've got Grisham in center field. You had Tatis in right field. You've got Bogarts and Kim, and obviously Kim being excellent. You've got Cronenworth at first, which is, at the minimum better than the old guy that we used to have for the most part. And of course you have Machado at third. So they just have so many good defenders. You had Gary Sanchez be okay behind the plate. Campuzano, I'm hoping, gets a little bit better. And while I usually say by now that I hope that Soto improves in this regard, that could get him easily the MVP award next year if he were to, tighten up his defense, I just don't see it. There are other players in baseball that are poor defenders like Ronald Acuna Jr., where their defense is really poor and you're just wondering why it isn't good. The guy has all the speed, all the tools, but he just doesn't seem to look like he cares all that much in the outfield. I'm not kidding. He literally crosses his legs in the outfield sometimes before the pitch, and stuff like that matters. Baseball is a game of inches. I don't see it with Soto. And I don't think that's a lack of effort. I think he just looks a little bit clumsy out there. I was at the Mets game this year when Soto hit that 400, 80-foot hit. It hit it was in Citi Field. It hit the bridge area. It hit one of the signs. Literally, it made a loud bang, and everyone in the stadium lost their mind. Absolute nuke. And then it's funny that later that game, him and Grisham going for the same ball, he kind of makes a mistake and he gets over both of them and should have been caught. That was kind of a little bit of a microcosm of Juan Soto's season. Generational, unbelievable player at the plate. Genuinely unbelievable player at the plate. Seriously, there's basically nobody better. Again, just this season, even in a year that wasn't his best in his prime, and if you were to just look at overall, there's only 7 players that had a better WRC plus than Juan Soto this year. And if you want to go by multiple years, let's do it right now. Let's do 2019 right now, actually. 2019, and then what is today? What are we in right now? Hold on, I gotta find. What are we at? October 17th. If you go by October 17th, if you go from 2019 to 2023, in terms of overall batting statistics, Juan Soto is just up there. And I think that that's a really important notion, because don't get me wrong, the defense is frustrating, but it doesn't detract too much from it. The only player that's been better with a WRC plus since 2019 is Aaron Judge, with a gobsmacking 170, especially because of his MVP season, while Soto's at 155. So still, as a hitter, probably the best in the game. You could say Freddie Freeman, you could say Ohtani, you could say Betts, heck, you could say Harper, certainly. There are going to be years like this one where Soto isn't the best overall offensive player, but as a whole, he's never going to go down. At least I don't think, especially at this young of an age, what he's doing, that I've aforementioned before. The only thing that I am wondering is, will this affect his contract, and should it? When it comes to Juan Soto, the biggest question this offseason for the Padres, and the reason I've saved this for the end, is because it's a discussion that I think is worth talking about on its own when we talk about biggest questions for the Padres offseason and the outlook for the Padres offseason. I'm wondering, is this defensive stuff going to hurt Soto? Is this guy better off as a DH? it's not the craziest question. If that were to be the case, then he's obviously going to get paid a whole lot less. I'm not saying that we need to immediately start putting him at designated hitter. I'm just saying that it would, if like we were to hear that the Padres acquired some decent left fielder, or they moved Merrill or something like that to left field, and they were like, we're going to try out Soto at DH, that wouldn't be the craziest thing ever. Now, I don't think it would happen, because I think Boris and Soto would be like, no, because we want him to get paid max dollar. I don't think that would happen. But again, it just makes you wonder a little bit. Is this a guy that you want to be paying a ginormous contract to when you know that he's pretty bad on the other side of the ball? Now, when it comes to that, I still think that it's a decent enough risk. And here's the thing. I'm worried about the Padres and them scaling back payroll. I'm worried about it because I'm worried about it what it might mean for Juan Soto. It's just hard for me to believe that it's a coincidence that they have this player everyone's talking about, whether or not they'll extend him, and then we get reports that they're scaling on payroll, almost as if it's foreboding of some, like they're trying not to get everyone's expectations too high, right? Like they're trying to temper expectations a little bit, especially given how the Padres every offseason have made like an incredibly huge move or signing. Basically, at least as long as I've been covering the show or the team on this show. So that's the issue there. So and again, I've mentioned before, I am a little bit wary of extending Soto, and it has nothing to do with Soto. It's just the fact that they have Manny, Tatis, and Bogarts for 10 plus years, and then you've got Darvish until he's 40. You've got Musgrove for a while longer. You've got Cronenworth for a while longer. So I'm just wondering, like, by sheer volume, are there too many long-term contracts on this team for me to feel comfortable with Juan Soto? It has, again, let me repeat, nothing to do with Juan Soto. I wanted them to extend him this past offseason. That was my number one thing that I wanted. You can go look it up. I think I did an episode on that. Was it my number one thing? I think it was. But that was like one of my number one things. But then they went out and did Manny, Bogarts, Suarez, Cronenworth, Darvish. So I was like, all right, now I don't know if I want to extend him, because now the whole roster is too much in the now. And that makes me a little bit concerned, because if it doesn't work, we could be looking like the Angels in 4 years. You know what I mean? Just a bunch of like crazy high paid players at the top, and then nothing to surround them. It's totally possible. Not necessarily like definite, because who knows? When that time comes around, maybe they'll have some more prospects that come up. Preller has been remarkably good at procuring prospects even after all these trades. And then you could have Merrill and Salas and Snelling, you know what I mean? Snell? Maybe he's like maybe that's a little bit of a sign, guys. Maybe that's a little bit of a sign. That they'll have those guys on pretty cheap deals to offset when Manny Machado's contract starts getting to $35 million, when Fernando Tatis Jr.'s contract starts getting into $36 million range, right? For now, the next couple years, it's not, right? This year it was $20 million, or I'm sorry, this year was actually $7 million, hilariously enough. And then next year it's 11 because we're still in like the arbitration years. And then next year it is 20, the year after that's 20 million. So the thing to do with Soto would to be doing what every team basically does these days, which is in the short term, the contract's a lot less. And I think that makes sense, because I think we see that often free agents are getting paid when they're 30 or whatever. So teams are like, all right, since if we're making this move, we're trying to win now. So therefore, let's make your salary lower now. That way we can still add some stuff to the rest of the team. It just makes logical sense. So in terms of the payroll thing, I'm sure they can find a way to make this make sense. I'm just a little bit worried, though. I'm still a little bit worried that is extending this guy and taking up whatever, and it depends. We don't know what the Padres mean by cutting back on costs. Frankly, it wouldn't be shocking if we get an announcement that they extended Soto for like $500 million, and then they signed some big starting pitcher to a big deal. Like, I wouldn't be like incredibly shocked if ownership was like, haha, that was just smoke and mirrors. You know what I mean? It wouldn't be shocking, but I am worried. And if it is the case that they are going to be really stingent on payroll, I would be a lot more cautious about extending Soto if it means that that's like the only player they can bring in and the only move they can bring in. While, on the other hand of things, I wouldn't mind spreading that money a little bit elsewhere, getting some good DH batters, getting some good bench players, upgrading that bullpen because they're going to lose Josh Hader probably, getting some decent starting pitchers on the back end because they're probably going to lose Snell. I kind of wouldn't mind that. And the reason I wouldn't mind it is because in theory, you already have your superstars. You have Manny, Tatis, and Bogarts. You don't necessarily need more than that. I know that the Braves, but that's an outlier. Like, they also lucked out by being able to get Acuna for like 1 cent on the dollar. You know what I mean? Like, in terms of what his contract is worth. He's only getting paid like $10 million a year. So that's what I'm saying. But all in all, in terms of Juan Soto's season, it's an A. He was absolutely fantastic this year. Yes, there was a couple moments, the first and third, his defense not great either, but I just think that the bat was too great, and he's still young. Maybe he can get better in the outfield. I don't see it personally, but maybe he can get better. Just at this young an age, it's just incredible, and it's not his fault that every time he took a walk that, Bogarts or Manny was hitting into double plays. That's just not his fault. Frankly. So I'm actually going to say A- because the defense was really bad. So I am going to give him an A-, but it was still such a good season that I can't really hate too much. I would be excited if they extended him, but I'm just throwing out my precautions for why I'd be a little bit worried that we look like the Angels in a few years, where you have these 4 guys getting paid a lot and then nothing else around them. It's a scenario. I'm like Destiny from the X-Men, seeing all the possible bad futures, the likelihood, and I'm wondering about that one over there that is really morbid and scary. And I'm wondering if an extension of Soto could do that because of all the moves that they made this past offseason. That's why I didn't necessarily want them to do all those moves, because I wanted Soto. I wanted to have some flexibility for the rest of the team. But alas, that is where we are, guys, and that about does it for today's edition of the Locked On Padres podcast, the only pod that may be better than the Padres themselves. Remember to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. In terms of the future of this episode, or this slew of podcasts we're on, tomorrow I plan to finally do the outlook for the Padres, ask some questions about the roster in general, and then day after that, talking with Paul Holden of Locked On Rockies, just about the Dodgers a little bit and whether or not they can be overthrown next year. And then, frankly, I don't know exactly what I'm doing for Friday, but in terms of future episodes, going to be talking about 5 things that Padres fans need to avoid this winter, some traps that may arise that you need to avoid. Going to be talking about Trevor Bauer, potentially, what he might mean as a free agent target. Going to be talking about more player reviews. Going to be doing Grisham, Musgrove, who else we got? We got Michael Wacha. We got Seth Lugo. We have in general, the crop of trade deadline acquisitions. The Padres' depth. We've got to talk about Jake Cronenworth. We got to talk about Ha-Seong Kim. I can't wait to do Ha-Seong Kim. And also, recently put out a request for mailbag episode on Friday. That's actually going to be Friday's episode. I forgot. That'll probably be Friday's episode. That's going to be a lot of fun. Feel free to leave comments in the YouTube right here. I'm going to mention this on tomorrow's show as well. DM me. Reply to the tweet on Twitter. I'm pretty sure it's up there. I'm going to pin it actually to Locked On Padres account. Send me questions, whatever you want. Seriously, if you want, you could ask me what my favorite color is. I don't really care. But, of course, try to keep them to baseball. But I'm just saying, if you are feeling goofy and you want to ask a baseball question and something random, I'm totally up for it. I love having a conversation in any way. But, of course, guys, that is it for today's episode. Stay safe and, of course, stay faithful. My Fire Faithful homies, take care.